Hey guys, Brooke Donato here, and I'm recording from Austin, Texas, where I've been quarantining for the last few months. The project that I want to talk to you guys about today is called As Usual, and it's a series of site specific photographs that were made from 2016 to 2019. When I started this project, I didn't really intend to create a full series. I was just interested in doing more work on location. So I would kind of just go out with my camera and tripod and find things that were interesting to me. It could be like the way that the light is hitting something, or it could be sort of like an anomaly in a landscape, like maybe a missing fence post or something that's sort of a little unkempt in a way. The project first started really in this cornfield that's across the street from my dad's house in Ohio. I would go home to visit him every Christmas, and each time I would try to make a self portrait in this same cornfield. And if you look at the results, like over the course of, 3 or 4 years, each photograph is completely different. Part of that is due to the fact that my style was evolving, and part of it is also due to the fact that I was learning how to take narrative and subject and background and kind of actually bridge these things in a more organic way. I think when you look at the photographs early on in that cornfield, I was using it more so as a backdrop and not really as a narrative tool to inform a storyline. It wasn't until 2016 when I decided that rather than the subject kind of standing in this field, that she would be interacting with it more organically. So I put my camera on a tripod, and I had a remote that I was using, and I basically just jumped into the cornfield over and over and over again to capture this image. It's a funny thing now because my dad is always like, "Why do you always want to go into that cornfield? Like, what are you doing down there?" And I'm like, "It's art, Dad." So it's just, he's tolerant of it now. The goal for this series is sort of to take these psychological experiences that we all have. So it could be like feelings of isolation, or depression, or anxiety, or even elation, happiness, and to sort of take these things and personify them in a real space that we're all familiar with. If I were to strip down this series to sort of three elements, they would be subject, location, and narrative, with narrative being the most important. It's pretty easy to take a subject and just put them in front of a beautiful place and take a picture, but to create a picture where the subject is interacting with that environment is sort of elevating it. By doing this, you're creating a narrative that's unique to you and not easily replicated by me or by someone else. When I first started out in photography, I was doing almost exclusively self portraits, and I think there's a lot of value in doing self portraiture because you're forced on both sides of the camera. It challenges you to think about subject matter and composition, but it also challenges you to think more like a model and think more about body language. A lot of people refer to my work as surreal, but there's nothing particularly surreal other than maybe perhaps the scenario that's being played out. All of the locations in these photographs are real places that we can go and experience. I'm sort of just finding ways to subvert them and make you question them in a new light. When I was living in Ohio, I really felt like I needed to move to New York to make good pictures. I felt really stuck with the environment that I had to work with. And I think something that's been interesting for me as a photographer is the more time I've spent in New York, the more I've actually grown to appreciate the things in Ohio that I have to work with. The photos of me in the cactus patch were made during a visit to Austin back in 2018. I was walking through this park, and I kind of noticed the way that the light was hitting these cactus needles. And I went back the next day and wore an extra layer of clothing and just like carefully placed myself in this cactus patch. Um, it didn't do much. The extra layer of clothing, it didn't do much. I was still like covered in needles, but I'd like to think it was worth it. The models in all of these photographs are people that I know or they're myself. So I used to work almost exclusively on a 10-second timer, which was really chaotic. You can imagine it was a lot of running back and forth and like trying to get the moment in time. And most of the outtakes were just like completely unusable. And then there would be that one image where I actually caught the moment. I work with a remote now and a tripod, and that's pretty much it. I shoot mostly natural light, and really most of the process at this point is just kind of revisiting that location. When I was visiting Austin earlier in November, I saw this dent that was in a fence on the side of the road, and I would pass it every day driving my friend to work. And I became like kind of obsessed with it, and I kept bringing it up to her. I was like, "Oh my god, I love that dent. I love that dent. Like, I want to go photograph that dent." And she's like, "Can you stop talking about the dent and the fence on the side of the road? It's not that interesting." But after a few weeks of visiting Austin, I came up with this idea where my friend would be pushing her head down into the fence so that it looked like all this weight from her head was actually like mangling these fence posts. So after a few weeks of studying this fence, we were able to go back just after sunset one day and make this photo. And even though this photograph isn't technically a part of the As Usual series, a lot of the skills I've used to create it are the same. So I scouted the location, I took preliminary pictures, I tried and failed and then tried again. There is no deadline for you to make a picture that you're happy with. I think if it takes you one day, great. But if it takes you several weeks, then that's okay too. It takes some discipline, but I find that if I sit on my couch waiting to feel inspired, I'll never feel inspired. So I try to just set up my camera and maybe pick an object in my house. It could be like a chair or a rug or just something that, I see every day. And I'll bring it into the frame and I'll just start experimenting with it. So I look for the way that the light is hitting something. I look for different body positions that I can use different angles. Is it more interesting from a different perspective if I shoot it from above as opposed to eye level? And these are the things that kind of push me out of creative ruts, especially when I'm stuck inside or I'm stuck in a certain place for a period of time. I think it's really important to push yourself when you least feel like it. During this quarantine, I challenged myself for the first 2 weeks to create a photo every day in my friend's kitchen, and him and I were the models for it. We shot the whole thing with just like natural window light and a tripod, and that's it. And it was really fun because it was like each day we would somehow pull off this photo that was really cool. And the next day I'd be like, oh my gosh, like, how are we going to do something better tomorrow? And some days we didn't. Some days we would try a couple things and I'd be like, oh, I need another day. Although all this downtime can be sort of daunting, it's also a really good chance for you guys to slow down and kind of think about what you're doing and revisit it. I have this one photograph of my head in a dollhouse that my grandma gave me. And when I first came up with this idea, I photographed the house just as is in the grass, and I kind of put my head in the dollhouse and made a few self portraits in my dad's front yard. And when I got back to my studio that's in New York, I was looking at the pictures, and it really the background really bothered me, the way that it was winter at the time and the trees were kind of separated and there wasn't enough foliage to like fill the frame. And I also realized that I didn't really like the color of the house, so I brought the image into Photoshop and I spent like all day trying to edit this thing. Like I tried to fill in the trees in the background, and I tried to paint the house in Photoshop and make it a new color. And finally, I was talking to someone about this photo, and they were like, "Why don't you just go reshoot it?" And I'm like, "I can't do that. Like I can't reshoot it. That's like failure, you know? I mean, I can't go back and recreate this. It's like that's a waste of time." And I think that's something that I've had to really let go of, and something that by letting go of, I've kind of been able to propel my work. I ended up going back later that summer, and I actually bought some acrylic paint and just went in and physically painted the house. And then because it was summer, the trees were more full, and I was able to execute just a way better version of this photograph than I would have if I had just kind of given up and decided that, I had already put enough effort into this thing. I think when we first start off in photography, we think of reshooting something as kind of a bad thing, like you didn't get it right the first time. But I've found actually that all of my best photographs have come from me revisiting the same place over and over again. So they're sort of born from that redundancy that we're maybe discouraged from. I think by doing this, I'm able to kind of unlock the full potential of a location, whether it be like a cornfield or a cactus patch or even just a plain white wall. So, if I could kind of leave you with one takeaway here, it would be not to see reshooting something or starting over as a failure, but rather as sort of the stepping stone for the work you'll create later. And, don't be discouraged by that, because it's all a part of the process and it's also a part of the fun. Thanks, guys.